Before you decide to watch the rest of this video, consider watching Camille's base lore first. All the base information is explained there, and without it you may easily get lost in this story, so I highly recommend watching the previous video. Hello everyone and welcome! Last time we talked about Camille, her augmentation, and the Pharaoh's family. The following story happened directly after the Severed Ties comic. The link for that will be in the description. So let's dive into The Weakest Heart. You should have killed her, started Stephen, watching 2 cubes of sugar melt in his tea. Lady Sophia will not be a problem, Camille said. Stephen waved his hand in the air, annoyed. Today maybe, but tomorrow? Emotions fester if left unchecked, sister. He looked up at her, questioning. Better to snuff the spark before it sets the house on fire, no? I have spoken to Arvino's principal intelligencer. You intelligencers and your deals. I still say she betrayed her house and should pay for it with her life. There may come a time for that, Camille answered. But I have made the agreement. Adalbert will see she stays out of trouble. She is his responsibility. Stephen leaned back in his chair with a look of acceptance, and he picked up the blanket that laid over his lap. That man could use another pair of eyes installed in his head, Stephen whispered. In his view, it was never about the pursuit of solution, just the end result. He never really considered the choices leading up to his decisions, but he was partially right. The end results were nice, but Camille much preferred the chase. She watched Stephen through the steam of her drink. His lips were twitching, and the pressure whitened his skin. There is something else, Camille said. Am I that obvious, sister? It seemed like he would have blushed if his weak heart had allowed it. Instead, he painfully smiled and pulled a folded piece of paper and a beaded chaplet from a drawer between them. Stephen rolled his wheelchair back, coughing with the effort. The chair was controlled by levers that pushed the whole clockwork mechanism forward. He drove close to Camille. Lady Arvino's short-lived engagement was not the only thing uncovered during the mess, he said. This was found on one of Baron's men during the cleanup. Camille looked at the items. The note's edges were burned with greenish light and the chaplet was well polished. Camille. She knew her brother only said her name like that when he was serious, or when he wanted something. She unfolded the note. The smell of Zone's acidic atmosphere rose from it. It was precisely written and was marked at the bottom with the artificer's mark. If Naderi had returned. Hakim Naderi is gone. The words fell from Camille's mouth, a reflex. It had been more than just years since the crystallographer had served as the lead artificer for their house. It had been a lifetime. Stephen considered his next move. Sister, you know what this is? Yes. She looked down at the paper. It was a diagram that mirrored the mechanical crystalline construction that pulsed within her chest. She grabbed her own heart's design. We thought them all destroyed. If this exists, the other could as well. I could finally be free from this chair, he said. To walk about my house as a master of his clan should. Perhaps it is time to let another take on the responsibility of clanmaster, Camille said. It had been many years since Stephen had been able to move inside his halls on his own. This wasn't just a piece of paper and a string of prayers. For Stephen, this was a map to immortality. This is only one schematic, she continued. You believe if we uncover the rest of Naderi's designs, our artificers will be able to recreate his work. There would still be one question of how to power it. Camille, please. She looked at her brother. Time had not been kind to his body, but his eyes were still the same Pharaoh's blue, just like Camille's. You and I, we have led this house to greater success than mother and father have ever dreamed, he said. If your augmentation can be recreated, this success, our success, Camille, it can go on forever. This house will ensure the future of Piltover. Indeed, we will ensure the progress of all Valoran. I am not the intelligencer for all Valoran. I may find nothing. Stephen gave a relieved sigh. But you will look? She nodded and gave him back the schematic, but she kept the chaplet. She turned to leave the room. And Camille? If he's alive, if you find him, it will be as it was before, she said. My duty, as always, is to the future of this house. The next late afternoon, Camille found herself near the North Wind Commercia, where crowds of people were preparing everything for the Progress Day, the city's annual day of innovation. The crowd was in constant movement as the workers swarmed around. No one stood still, no one but a single blonde person at the edge of the square. That person was watching her from a distant market stall as Camille continued through the crowds. She waited for the right moment and she ducked into a blind alley where she used her grappling lines and got on the roofs. A moment later, the blind follower entered the same alley. Her clothes were made not to draw attention inside zone, but the whip at her side revealed her to be from Piltover. Camille let her walk forward, then she dropped behind her. "Did you lose something, girl?" Camille said. The girl was ready to pull out the whip, but she decided not to. "It seems I found it." The girl raised her open hands in the air. "I bring a message. From your brother, madam," she said. "Give it here." The girl kept one hand up and used the other to pull out a small note. It was sealed with Stephen's pharaoh sigil. "Move more than an eyelash and I will slit your throat," Camille said. It was a message from Stephen. He decided to hire help in case Camille would be limited by her lingering sentimentality. She knew he meant it well, but she was still annoyed that he didn't trust her. "I should kill you for delivering the insult," she said. "Your name?" "Aviette." She was young, not even an augmented finger. "And you still took this assignment knowing the possible consequences of my irritation?" "Yes, milady," she said. "I hoped if I pleased you, there might be a more permanent position within your house." "I see." Camille turned her back to her, giving the girl a chance to attack if she wanted to. But all she heard behind her was an exhaled breath and following footsteps. "Do we have a destination, milady?" "Church," she said with the chaplet still in her pocket. "Keep up." Roughly an hour later, they arrived at the first assemblage of the Glorious Evolved. They were still in Piltover, but at the very edge of Zone Grey. Camille turned to the girl. "You will stay here." "I'm to follow you," Aviette said. "Your brothers? You will stay here," Camille said again. "The Glorious Evolved are fervent believers. They do not take kindly the unaugmented." Camille looked at the girl, waiting for her response. Aviette shifted her weight slightly to her back foot. She still itched for a fight, to prove herself, but was unsure if this was the right moment. Camille smiled. "There's still time enough for that later, girl." She entered the church and walked into a hall illuminated by orange thermal lamps. The 50 or so people sitting there murmured words in unison, giving the impression that a great machine breathed beneath them. All the people here covered the parts of their bodies that were still living flesh in dark fabrics. They exposed only their augmented arms and legs, and all of them were high-end augmentations. Piltovan or Zonite, it didn't matter to the Glorious Evolved. In the middle of the hall, a young woman with mechanical elbows talked to a man with metal jaw. "The body is frail," she said. "The flesh is weak. The machine drives us forward." The group responded together. The words echoed in the empty air above them. "The future is progress." Anyone else would be interrupted by this sight, but Camille continued her search. She noticed an older man heavily breathing through his apparatus. He was known as the Brother Xavier. He was kindling few spark lights inside the chaplet's altar. Above him was a window with a figure made out of colored glass. It was the Grey Lady, holy patron of the Glorious Evolved. As Camille approached him, she noticed jars of organs and pieces of bodies wrapped in linen laying all around.
Camille,
Xavier said.
have you come for contemplation?
Information, brother. She pulled the chaplet from her pocket. Brother Xavier turned to face her. His eyes were under glass, magnified like those in the jars, but his were still alive.
Where did you find this?
He shook his head as he inspected it.
Never mind. I should know by now not to ask these questions.
He went back to attending his lights.
Several weeks ago, I met a man carrying this. He came to light a spark and ask her a favor for the coming Progress Day.
He nodded towards the window above him. For the people around here, it was common to bring a sacrifice to this altar in exchange for the Grey Lady's blessing.
He had the tanned skin of the desert dwellers, older than the usual foreign apprentice who pursued the auditions.
Brother Xavier continued. Do you know which clan he sought?
He said he was staying at the pay house near Clan Arvino.
Suddenly silence fell upon the altar.
This evening's testifying is over. My duties call.
Brother Xavier patted Camille's hand. He gathered his dark robes and made his way back to the main hall. Finally, Camille had a chance to gather her thoughts. Hakim had returned, but he had not sent a word. It annoyed her. Why would he be poking around other clans? Hakim was spheres above Clan Arvino's artificers. Through the cut glass forming the Grey Lady, Camille could see Aviette standing outside beneath the street lamp. She was still following orders. Her train of thoughts was interrupted by something small behind her. Camille's hex crystal heart pulsed in anticipation as she turned to face her threat. Are you her? A small voice asked. From a dark corner, a little girl stepped forward. She could not have been more than 6 or 7. Are you the Grey Lady? She asked again. In one arm she carried a bundle wrapped in silk, similar to the ones lying around. The opposite sleeve of her dark dress was empty. Camille knelt down and the girl inspected her blades. Did you give up your legs for the Progress Day? She asked. Camille was silent for a moment. I chose these, she said, because they better serve my purpose. The girl nodded. Camille noticed the black spider veins on the girl's little fingers. It was rare for someone so young to get this disease, but the Glorious Evolved took in all the sick, and they often removed their dying flesh, turning it into a key to transforming person's life through faith and technology. Brother Xavier said it gets easier, she said. It does, Camille replied. She knew whoever operated the girl had done a bad job. The surgeon probably wanted to be kind and had the courage to remove only one arm, but if they wait, the spider veins may soon reach her heart. Suddenly, Camille noticed that the shadow of Aviette outside was no longer alone. She stepped out of the altar and made her way outside. Do you miss them? The little girl called. Camille didn't turn back, but she could picture the girl's face in her mind. She could because she remembered her doubts when Hakim asked her a similar question. Her heart, him, would she miss any of it? She grabbed her hex crystal augment as she ran out. No, she lied. Outside, Aviette was ready to fight. She was surrounded by a gang of augmented thugs. Give us that pretty thing and maybe we won't kill you slow-like. The smallest one slurred loudly. You didn't say please, Camille called out. The man with the twitching nose looked up. Aye boys, he said. No worries now. Looks like there'll be more than enough to go around. Nice of you to join us, milady, Aviette said. Yes, we was about to indulge in a little Progress Day remuneration, one of the big ones with a copper augmentation said. His twin-sized partner added, Your Grace. Camille's arrival distracted them just enough to break their circle around Aviette. That was the opening she needed. She sprinted forward and with a long sweep she caught the first one in line across the shoulder. Blood started soaking his clothes, but it was the shocking energy from her hex crystal that knocked the man unconscious. The two chubby ones grabbed Aviette, while the tall ones approached Camille, but she smiled. After so much stress, this was exactly what she needed. Moments later, after a dance of blades and augmented pieces flying around, Camille was the only one left standing. "Now collect your broken bits and get out of my sight," she told them. Aviette's whip rang clearly across the street, and Camille knew the chubby ones caused no harm. She then looked around. She noticed that the smallest one with the biggest ego was missing. He was running away toward the assemblage hall. With the use of her grappling hook, she jumped to the church and dropped right on him. "Did you really think you could run?" she asked. His head shook out a terrifying no, but his fingers reached for a knife at his belt. He squinted from the blinding radiance of her hex crystal so near his face. He was desperate to drive the knife through Camille's leg. "Go ahead," she whispered. His eyes widened in surprise, but it didn't stop him. The tip of his knife pierced the dark leather, but went no further as it stopped at the metal legs. While the knife had stopped, his hand continued with full force and it slid across his own blade. Unlike the others, this man screamed loudly. Camille looked above them into the window with the grey lady. She saw a small face pressed against the glass, watching them. "Hunt here again and I will end you," Camille promised. With that, the man instantly crawled back, then got up and ran away. Behind her, Camille heard Aviette winding the metal of her whip. "I've heard you didn't have a heart under all these mechanics," Aviette said. "Perhaps the rumors are mistaken." "Mind your manners, girl, or I'll mind them for you." It was dark before, but it truly became night when they arrived at the Clan Arvino house. They were able to get information from the innkeeper. Naderi was either in the basement or on the third floor. Camille left Aviette to the cellar while she used her grappling line to jump up. Fortunately, the third floor had an opened window, so she crouched through and stepped inside. The room was dim, with only a single lamp lighting the small desk. But it was the man sleeping on the desk that caught Camille's breath. The curls of dark hair, the desert tanned skin. The vibration of her hex crystal quickened. "Hakim," she called out softly. The shape at the desk moved. Waking slowly from the sleep, he stretched with grace of a cat and turned around. The young man wiped the sleep from his eyes in disbelief. He was so much like Hakim it hurt, but it was not him. "Mistress Pharaohs?" He shook himself more awake. "What are you doing here?" "Have we met?" she asked. "No, not exactly, milady," he said, almost embarrassed. "But I have seen your face often." He went back to his desk and looked through some papers, pulling out one slightly older than the others. He handed it to Camille. The lines were strong and the inkwork perfect. No doubt this was Hakim's work. It was no diagram. Instead, it was a drawing of Camille's face. She could even remember posing for it. He must have sketched it from memory after working in the lab one night. Her hair was down and she was smiling. She was a woman in love. The sting was so sharp she couldn't help but take a breath. She didn't say anything to the young man in front of her. She couldn't. "It could have been drawn yesterday, milady," he said, filling the silence. He meant it as a compliment, but it opened a deep scar. "My uncle carried this with him until he passed." "Your uncle? He's dead?" "Yes, Hakim Naderi. Do you know him?" he asked. "Yes," she breathed out. She was about to ask a selfish question she carried for far too long. One she was never sure if she even wanted to know the answer to. The pain of memory was overwhelming, but since she already stepped far enough, why not open all the wounds? She looked at the man who looked too much like Hakim. "Tell me, did your uncle ever marry?" "No, milady," he said, unsure if he was going to disappoint her. Uncle Hakim said that to love your work is more than we could ask for in life. Camille had wept all her tears long ago, so there was none left for her now. She picked up all the papers and set the picture on top. She realized she was holding her past in her hands. Is this all of it? All of the work? Her words came out in a dark whisper. Yes, milady, but... His voice trailed off in disbelieving horror as she set the bundle on the coals in the furnace and blew gently. She watched until everything turned to dust. It was Hakim's nephew that pulled her back to the present. He still couldn't believe how much he had lost in such a short time. It was all overwhelming. Camille escorted him to the street below. He adjusted the leather satchel on his shoulder and stared at the ground. He looked back to her. His defeat was replaced with fear. Camille was so lost in the past that she didn't even hear the metal wire. A quick snap bound her arms to the side. "That's far enough, milady," Aviette said as she took Hakim's nephew over. "Is this what my brother paid you for?" Camille knew Aviette was waiting for the right moment this entire evening, and there it was. "Yes," she said. "All of us." Suddenly, all the men from before emerged from the shadows with their augmentations repaired. The chubby one held a dagger at Hakim's nephew, while the two big juggernauts walked forward. "Mind the crystals, Seamith," Aviette said while her whip held Camille's hands. "We're to collect them and Naderi, or no one gets paid." Was all of this her brother's jealousy? She knew Stephen felt the tide of years slipping away and saw her standing near immortal in all of it. But he truly had no idea the cost her duty to the family. Could he not see what it would cost him now? "And the rest?" the copperman asked. "All yours," replied Aviette. "It was nice to meet you, Your Grace, to demonstrate your talents earlier," he said as he pulled his augmented arms back into a fist. His grin widened. "It will make it go much quicker." The metal knuckles connected with her jaw. He expected Camille to fight it, but instead she let the punch take her down to her knees. She tasted her own blood, but at least the man was off balance with his heavy fist on the ground. "You haven't seen all my tricks," she said as she stood. The energy from Camille's hex crystal coursed through her, the power building up like a wall. The Juggernaut's brother tried to step in, but the shield wouldn't give. Aviette pulled the whip, trying to get Camille off balance, but it wouldn't work. Camille leapt forward, slitting the throat of the second Juggernaut and coming down to impale the first. Aviette cracked her whip at the man holding Hakim's nephew. "Abandon the job and I'll kill you both." "You still think I have heart now?" Camille asked. Aviette was unsure, but stood her ground. "I am the sword and shield of Clan Pharaohs," Camille said. "My brother seeks to kill me to extend his bridal life for a few more selfish moments. His desires have betrayed his duty and our house." She felt the crystal pulse faster. "And you will not live to see the morning," she said. She channeled the crystal's energy and the shield around her turned into electrified prison. There would be no escape now. She leapt into the air, smashing her wrists against the ground, cracking the binding. The force was so powerful it knocked everyone else on the ground. Aviette jumped back to her feet. The fight she was looking for to prove herself to Camille's brother was not going as planned. Her fear overwhelmed her and she tried to escape, but there was nowhere to run. Whatever Stephen told her about Camille, she underestimated. Aviette saw that any trace of mercy Camille carried boiled away with the revelation of her brother's betrayal. Camille stepped forward, letting her back leg arc around. She leaned into it as the blade connected. Aviette struggled to keep what was inside her belly from spilling out, but it was a futile effort. Quick swipe ended her last two hired men too. She picked up Aviette's blood-soaked whip from the street and carefully approached Hakim's nephew. He was obviously panicking, so she had to calm him down. She untied his bindings and helped him to his feet. "The tests," he said. "What am I to show to the artificers tomorrow?" "You studied under your uncle?" "Yes, he taught me everything, but the designs." Hakim's nephew knew his options. Either come to work for her, or give up his life's work. Her position as intelligencer would not allow the knowledge he possessed to fall to another house. "You will build them better tomorrow," she said. Unable to process his thoughts into words, he nodded his head and stumbled into the dark. Later that night, Camille stood at the balcony of her brother's study, looking over the entire city. A chilled breeze ran through the house. She thought about everything that happened that day, about her past, about Hakim, about everything she lost. She remembered what her father told her, that their work would be the promise of progress, like a wheel added to a much bigger machine. She also remembered that she warned them. One ill-shaped gear could destroy the entire machine. One cog that rejected its role could destroy the machine. Steven's chair creaked along the carpet. "Camille?" She said nothing, unable to tear her eyes from the fragile view and her even more fragile thoughts of the past. "You've returned," he said. "Aviette?" She tossed Aviette's whip on the woolen blanket laid on his lap. "I see. She served her purpose," she said. "That being?" For having sat so long in that chair, Camille always thought her brother to be an artful dancer. "To remind me of mine," she said. "Your purpose?" Steven's initial nervousness slipped into agitation. He knew he would die tonight. He had been caught and he couldn't run, especially from her. His only consolation was to try and wound her as grievously as he could before his time expired. Bound as he was by his frailty, the only weapon left were words. "Your duty is to me," he said, just like it was to our father. Duty, her father, the right words could cut deeper than any knife. "You are here to serve me," he growled. "No, I swore to serve this house." The oath she had taken pricked fresh in her mind. The oath of all intelligencers. She remembered it without effort. "To this house I will be true and faithful, putting its needs before my own. To this I will commit my mind, body, and heart." They were the same words she told Hakim the night she had ended everything between them. "That duty of intelligencer was meant to be mine." Steven's voice wrenched her back to the present. He gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles whitened. "You swore an oath to our father. And what did you do? He died because you were not strong enough. And then you nearly deserted the house. For what? Love? Attention? Where was your duty then?" He spat the words into space between them. Camille questioned her decisions. She had let these spider veins fester far too long. What kindness had she shown to this house by ignoring his madness? "I cut out my own heart for the family. For you, Steven," she said. "I have given all I am, after all these years. Can you say the same?" Steven sputtered like a wet spark, desperately trying to flare to life, but knowing there was little left to catch fire. "Father gave this to you, but I was the one who spent my entire life proving to him that I deserved it," he said. Disgust weighed his words. "You may see me as your betrayer, but you are the one responsible, sister. If you could be trusted to make the right decisions, I would not have to step in." Camille gathered her thoughts again. "I had let him become this monster. I tolerated his grim plots and motivations, all because I was unwilling to face a future without him. A future where no one remembered the woman I was. If I had been stronger in my resolve, I could have ended this years before. I have chiseled away parts of myself, but in all that time, I never had the courage to cut away the piece that I knew would blacken our house." That night, I would have run away with Hakim if you had not made the effort to remind me my duty, she said. She remembered that night. Stephen faked his own attack, all to let her separate honor from emotion. She knew that without it, she might have given up what she was meant to be. It was because of his dark plans that she was in the right place. Camille moved toward him and let her fingers rest on his shoulder. She could feel his aged bones beneath the rich silk. The vibrations in her chest built. Stephen looked up at her, the blue of his eyes hardening like chips of broken glass as the energy around her augmentation grew. You have always been my responsibility, brother. The chill in the air entered her words. Stephen, I will fail you no longer. She could feel the charge electrifying the hair at the back of her neck. Her hand drifted from his shoulder to the edge of his face. A spark arced through her fingers and enveloped Stephen. It didn't take much to push his heart over the edge. The dark muscle that drove her brother seized in his chest. His eyes closed, and his chin sagged in Camille's hand.